On today's show, the Pacers finally win a Game 3 and go up 2-1 on the Thunder. How Bennedict Mathurin and the Indiana bench turned this game around. Why SGA and OKC fell apart in the fourth and more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA Game Night.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. And joining me is my partner in crime, the host of Locked On Heat, David Ramil. David, what'd you see in Game 3 of the NBA Finals last night?
Classic matchup, greatest game I think in the series so far. Just a lot of back and forth, a lot of activity all over the place. And you know what I did see was your prediction for a Game 3 Indiana win coming true. So you got to take some credit for that one. Pat yourself on the back because it certainly came true.
It is going to take a lot of willpower and restraint to not run a lot of victory laps on this show, David, because people were talking really reckless after some of my bold predictions last week. And lo and behold, some of them, quite a few of them, came true actually with a Pacers Game 1 win, a Game 3 win. Maybe we'll get Pacers winning in 7 games too. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But we want to thank you for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Pacers getting the Game 3 win, 116-107 final score. And this was a game, David, that I feel like the big story in this game has to be the Indiana bench. Like that to me felt like the difference maker in this one. And it not just at one point, it wasn't just like one stretch or one point. It was at so many different points. The Indiana bench came up big time and time again in this game. And in particular, Bennedict Mathurin, who played the biggest game in the biggest game of his career, the best playoff game of his career to date. 27 points, 9 of 12 shooting, went 2 of 3 from downtown, 7 of 8 at the free throw line to go along with 4 rebounds, had an assist in there. Just insane production for him off of Indiana's bench.
He was phenomenal. Just the level of aggression, just you could see that he had that shot falling and he was fearless in doing so. And they were pivotal moments too, whether it was in helping Indiana establish a lead or if OKC wound up getting back on top and he wanted to even up things a little bit. Like he was so consistently good and impactful. And I think that's what you saw from the whole bench is that when they were out there, their minutes just felt like they were dominating in those stretches. They were really key possessions there. TJ McConnell with his effort. Maybe he was a little shaky on some passes, but making up for it in other ways. Stealing an inbound pass under the baseline from Alex Caruso and getting the layup. That was phenomenal. That was just really old school basketball.
We got 2 Grand Theft McConnells in this game. It was fantastic.
Yeah, really, really good stuff. I mean, it was just a fun game, and especially for Indiana fans, I would imagine. But you know what? It was just a great effort from that bench. Obi Toppin came in and played some really good minutes as well. 10 points from McConnell. They were really solid. And conversely, you look at OKC's depth, and they were solid, but not as impactful, not as productive, and that was a huge difference in the game.
49-18 advantage for Indiana in the bench scoring department, and where I really thought there was I think maybe one of the most important inflection points of this game, and we'll unpack this a little bit more later on as we kind of navigate, and we'll get into, specifically some of the things that Indiana did well here in this game, and then talking about kind of where some of these shortcomings were for the OKC Thunder a little bit later on. But to me, watching that fourth quarter, and they were even talking about this on the broadcast, about the decision, right? So SGA played, the entire third quarter, and then, okay, what time do you bring him back in, right? When do you bring SGA back? How soon do you bring him back? And SGA checked in, like, it was, I want to say like a solid 3, maybe 4 minutes sooner than Tyrese Haliburton had to for the Pacers. And a large part of that was Rick Carlisle's ability to trust his bench unit to trust that those guys could just keep the game at arm's length, or at times even building upon the lead, keeping the Thunder at bay. And it really felt like SGA down the stretch didn't have the juice to close this game out because of kind of this war of attrition that the Pacers have been waging on him, where they're picking him up 94 feet, right, just being physical with him all game long, whether it's Nembhard, whether it's Nesmith, whether it's Shepherd, whoever's guarding SGA is just literally like in his jersey, so physical with him. We know that the Pacers were struggling with some foul trouble at one point in this game, right? They had Siakam, Nembhard, and Nesmith all had 3 fouls going into halftime because of how physical they were playing defensively in this one. And I really think that was a big part of OKC's inability to kind of get over the hump or get to the finish line in this game, because Mark Daigneault had to rely so much on SGA and just couldn't trust his other guys, specifically the bench, right, to step up.
Right. 42 minutes played for SGA despite that, prolonged stretch. And, the physicality is a great point, because they really made things so difficult for him. And he kind of failed a little bit in the moment. And I think that's not necessarily on him, because it's a balanced approach, or at least it should be in theory. And it certainly wasn't tonight. But that fourth quarter in general was a debacle for Oklahoma City. They outscored 18-32. And that was the game right there, because they just couldn't seem to build any sort of momentum. Indiana was just capitalizing. And you expect the home team to do this, but not against a team as good as Oklahoma City. And so it was really a lackluster effort. And I expected more, considering we saw that blowout in game 2. You thought they might be able to continue building on that. But credit to the Pacers. They came back, established their pace early on, did a lot of things that they wanted to get to that they weren't able to do so in game 2. And they really, I think, not dominated, but they were precise. And this is what we've talked about all postseason long in terms of what the Pacers do. This the precision. Haliburton as the head of the snake, but again, key contributions from Siakam, the bench, etc. And they were just very, very precise in picking apart what Oklahoma City does well, and also keeping them from their strengths. And I think we saw that in game 3 win.
Neither team leading by more than 9 points in this game. So at no point was there like a double digit. Like this game was just, it felt like the moment either team started to kind of pull away or make a little bit of a run, there were so many answers. There were so many moments until kind of that very tail end where Indiana was able to kind of pack it up and run away with it. I will say, as impressive as Chet Holmgren was early in this game, Miles Turner had him completely packed up to wrap this one up. There was a stretch where Miles Turner had 3 blocks in 3 minutes on Chet Holmgren, 2 of them on the same possession, just completely bottling him up down the stretch of this game to where he didn't even really feel his impact there, at least offensively, in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think Holmgren's production really stands out in comparison to Turner, but despite the production from Holmgren, it's almost like they were allowing him to have those points. I think his minutes, again, were not particularly impactful out there. Like, he just wasn't as much of a factor as he could have been, certainly not as much as he was in game 2. And Turner was, conversely, really solid. Like, defensively, he just had his opportunities there. He was really dominant in that way. Physicality, I think, really controlled that matchup individually. We talked about that leading up to the series, that we thought Turner was going to have a big moment here and there, because this is his first opportunity, his first finals games. And for him to be able to step up like that at home, I think is a huge thing for him and for the Pacers both. But in that individual matchup, despite the production indicating otherwise, I think Turner outclassed Holmgren by a wide margin in tonight's game.
Coming up, what makes Indiana's offense so difficult for this Thunder defense, despite being so historic, to contain, and how the defense for Indiana actually stepped up in a big way here in game 3. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, and through 3 games, these finals have been amazing. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you need to experience live, and this year's matchups are delivering in a big way. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop the closer it gets to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. I've used Game Time throughout the season to attend Rockets games, and let me tell you, it makes the ticket buying experience so seamless. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect. There's no hidden fees, no surprise fees at checkout. That's the best part, right? Fully transparent across the board. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And continuing on here at Locked On NBA Game Night. Thanks so much for making Game Night your first listen each and every day. For your next listen, go check out Locked On Pacers with Tony East if you want to celebrate the win. Go check out Locked On Thunder with Rylan Stiles if you want to figure out what went wrong for OKC. But we're going to focus on the Pacers here a little bit in this segment, David. And I'll tell you what, it's almost like they took a page right out of the Thunder book here with their defensive approach in this game, forcing 19 OKC turnovers in this one to the tune of 21 points off of those 19 turnovers. The Pacers defense was stifling in this game. And not to say that it hasn't been good throughout these playoffs, but just to see the level at which OKC was really struggling to execute for really large stretches of this game, right? OKC, earlier in this one, before the bench kind of checked in and really kind of changed the energy and the flow of this game, OKC led by 9 kind of early. Then there was like a quick 14-point turnaround in that second quarter where Indiana won the quarter by 40-28. But defensively and at the head of the snake, a lot of credit to Tyrese Haliburton, who has consistently been targeted in this series and really throughout the playoffs, throughout the entire postseason, but really stepped up in a big way defensively in this game. Answering the call, had great moments, throughout this game, just defensively in isolation, shooting the gap, forcing turnovers, walked away with a couple steals, had a blocked shot in this one from behind on J-Dub, like just some great defensive moments from a guy that you don't usually think has many great defensive moments.
Oh, absolutely. I think he was really active. He played a smart level of defense today, and I think that was a big difference in what we've seen from him. Again, not that he's been particularly bad, but he just hasn't been good. Today, he didn't try to match Oklahoma City's physicality. He didn't try to body up on anybody that he was guarding. He just used his better judgment. He used anticipation, his skill, his reflexes. He's quicker than most players out there. And as such, he was able to make the reads just right because he's been able to figure out the pace of this game, the tempo, the kind of tempo that which Oklahoma City plays, and his ability to anticipate those passes, I think, played a huge difference. Even when somebody would get past him on their drive to the hoop, he used his hands to be able to swipe the ball out, force a turnover that way. And I think he was really masterful in that way. But you're right about Indiana's defense in general being really, really good, holding them to just 79 field goal attempts, 14 less than their regular season average. That's not Oklahoma City style at all. But between their turnovers and overall sloppy play and just some dumb fouls on their part as well, and Indiana's defense playing at such a high level, they just weren't able to get anything going offensively. They shot the ball fairly well on those opportunities, which they did have, but this was a very different offensive display from a team that's been very good in that regard this postseason.
Yeah, this one kind of, I don't want to say that this one just completely boiled down to the possession battle, but it was certainly a factor here because you look at the numbers and OKC had, a solid game kind of across the board, 23 of 30 from the free throw line. You'd probably expect them to shoot a little bit better from the charity stripe than that, although 76% is not horrible, but then,
right.
45.5% from downtown, 10 of 22 from deep, and then 46.8% overall. But again, only 79 actual field goals compared to the Pacers, who got 86 field goals up and shot 51.2% from the floor, despite struggling from downtown. The thing that they've done better than any other team this entire postseason, and they only hit 9 threes on 33% from downtown. That was the number that when I was like looking over the stats after the game, kind of just like, appreciating being in the moment, being present, enjoying the game. And then I looked at the stats and was like, wow, I really didn't feel like the Pacers only hit 9 threes in this game. It certainly felt like a lot more while I was watching it. I was shocked. I was really shocked to see OKC actually walk away winning the 3-point battle in this one.
Well, yeah, I mean, because again, the shots felt more impactful. It just seemed like at those opportunities when they were deciding inflection points throughout the game, and you don't want to look into it too deeply, perhaps, at the same time, it just felt like when they needed a thing, they just weren't able to get that at all. And that was really the deciding factor. I mean, there were so many things, so many moments throughout the game where OKC could have done what they've been able to do all postseason during the regular season, and they just weren't able to. So credit to Indiana. Oklahoma City just did not play their game as well, though, and I think Indiana was a big part in just trying to keep them uncomfortable, really dominant in that sort of, just again, not dominant from an overall standpoint where you say, oh, they just crushed them or anything like that, but they just played a really smart level of basketball, and Oklahoma City just couldn't keep it up.
Well, and I think here's a big element that I think not enough people were kind of, paying attention to coming into this series. And this is one of the things that gave me a lot of confidence actually in this Pacers team and in this matchup in particular, is that obviously this Thunder defense is historic and they're phenomenal and they've done what they've done so well all season long. I will say the style of defense that they do play is very taxing though. And I do think you are going to start to see that more and more as this series progresses, even here at the end of game 3, right? They were talking about on the broadcast, right? Guys, falling down on the floor, taking a few extra seconds, trying to catch their breath, trying to, it's very hard to do what OKC does because they don't have a lot of like plus size at many of their positions, right? Chet has a ton of size and length for a big, but outside of that, they run a bunch of guards out there 24/7, right? They are a smaller team that has to really work together as a cohesive unit to do what they do consistently. And from the Pacers perspective, here's a stat that was incredible in this game is they had 7 turnovers in the first quarter, and then they went about 18 straight minutes without a single turnover. They didn't have a single turnover in the second quarter, and they went approximately about 6, maybe 7 minutes through that third quarter, kind of weathering the storm at the start of that third quarter. OKC had that 8-0 run right out of halftime, and then they responded with a 12-2 run of their own to kind of get back and leapfrog back in front with the lead. But it wasn't until about that midway point in the third quarter where they finally turned the ball over. And then they had a couple more here and there throughout the rest of the way. But taking care of the basketball was such a big, important factor for this Pacers team. And I think what makes it so difficult for the Thunder to really key in on them is obviously it's like, okay, stop Tyrese Haliburton, right? He's the head of the snake and you've got to limit him. And they weren't even really able to do that effectively in this game because Haliburton was sensational, really aggressive, looking for his shot, hunting his offense, finished with 22 points on 9 of 17 shooting, had 11 assists. We talked about his defense. Pacers are now 20-1 in the regular season and the playoffs combined when Haliburton goes for 20 or more points and 10 or more assists in the same game. But because the Pacers have so many different guys who can initiate offense, it can be Haliburton, it can be Nembhard, it can be Siakam, it can be TJ McConnell, it can be Bennedict Mathurin. There's so many different guys that can get them into their offense, and not just like, it's not like a Band-Aid fix. It's not like, oh, I guess we'll survive with the TJ McConnell minutes. Every single one of their initiators are capable offensive creators.
It's like you were saying earlier, too. I think this is where the depth was really such a huge factor in Indiana's favor because they were able to control so much of the pace of their game and just have that production so consistently throughout. Whereas, again, as Oklahoma City tires because of their defensive schemes, because of what they do and how they put pressure out on the perimeter. And look, it worked. I mean, to hold Indiana, such a good shooting team, to only 33% from the perimeter, that's a huge factor. At the same time, that constant effort, that's where you need somebody to pop off, just to be able to have that kind of swing factor level of production that might make things a little bit easier for them. Otherwise, you're just playing out there exhausted. You're not getting the production from your stars. You're not getting the kind of production consistently from everybody else. I think this is where a lot of people are realizing that Indiana, this is the style of play, their personnel, it was actually pretty well suited to handle a matchup against a really good Oklahoma City team. However, the outcome of the series, I think it really shows that Indiana was a lot better of a team than a lot of people thought, because maybe there were some people thinking they were a fluke or maybe they got lucky. No. They know what they're doing. They're very precise in the way they play, and they've really shown the ability to kind of take Oklahoma City's momentum and use it against them and kind of establish their own pace, their own way of playing, just playing with that precision, the depth, so many different factors in their favor. It's been a really interesting matchup. So I'm really curious to see how game 4 plays out, because we've already seen a blowout. We've already seen Indiana style kind of take over the series a little bit. Now they have the 2-1 lead. Can they keep it going? Can they hold on to this in game 4? Because there's a lot that could be, in my opinion, that would be the real swing game there. Like, typically it's a game 3, but in game 4, if Oklahoma City can win that game fairly easily, get that kind of momentum back and go back to Oklahoma City, I think it'll be a really interesting series, and probably one that might go 7 games.
Selfishly, I would absolutely love 7 games of this series. Also, I got to give a quick shout out here. We've talked about the Pacers bench kind of intermittently through these first 2 segments, but just, I mean, what a field day for the University of Arizona here. TJ McConnell, Bennedict Mathurin. I know Richard Jefferson on the broadcast is loving every second of it. Bear down. I hope I did that right for all the U of A fans out there. But coming up, how SGA and OKC fell apart as this game progressed, and what adjustments might we see out of them moving forward. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Wayfair. Look, there's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summertime. Wayfair has everything that you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, and even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. My girlfriend and I just added a couple new lounge chairs to our back patio area. We love to invite guests over and just have some drinks, maybe play some board games outside. It's fantastic. It's like our own personal slice of heaven, and you can get in on it as well. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's wayfair.com, Wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And final segment here at Locked On NBA Game Night. All right, David, when you look at this Game 3 and what happened for the Thunder, especially kind of as this game, progressed, and it just felt like at every turn the Pacers had an answer for the Thunder, that they just couldn't quite get over the hump and regain control of this one. I know we've highlighted, the turnovers. We've talked about kind of this war of attrition, the minutes load, the workload for SGA. Kind of what did you see as the biggest problem for OKC in this game?
Nothing in particular in terms of, I think they were just a little sloppy with their level of play. I think it was all tied together in a way that really just they're not used to. They're not accustomed to this. They've been so dominant throughout the regular season. They flipped that switch so frequently and so easily. And when they couldn't do it because they just weren't capable of defending Indiana to a high level, they weren't capable of playing their style of play. That they're just the way they attack, the way they do things, the way they control the pace of the game. It just kind of all seemed to snowball into what was really a very sloppy effort. I unexpectedly won in the fourth quarter. I mean, they shot 6 of 17 from the floor in the fourth quarter, 0 for 4 from 3-point range. So credit to Indiana's defense. I mean, we're going to make the story of the game how badly Oklahoma City played in the fourth quarter, but I think Indiana was most dominant when it mattered most, and that's where they were really able to kind of just play their game as precisely, as dominantly as they possibly can. And whenever Oklahoma City was keeping things even within just arm's reach, Indiana just said, no, not tonight. We're gonna pull ahead. We're gonna pull away. We're gonna continue to build on our lead. So as much as you could say Oklahoma City lost the game because of the fourth quarter, Indiana really took it from them. And I think they really were the better team, at least during that last 12-minute stretch. And that's where you really got the most production from Mathurin, and you got so many different guys stepping up in key moments there. Conversely, you just weren't getting that kind of production from Oklahoma City. So I didn't see any one particular thing. I think it was more of a system break. So at least that's the way I saw it.
I wonder too, and it's such an interesting kind of juxtaposition because, I just made the point about the Pacers and how many different guys for them can initiate offense and really kind of get them into their actions. Yeah. And meanwhile, the opposite for the Thunder, right, where everything is like, it's not quite that they live and die by SGA, but everything goes through SGA. And then like they've got J-Dub that they run their offense through occasionally, either, like he's the primary when SGA is on the bench in the minutes where he's sitting, which obviously in this game was only 6 minutes. But even when, when SGA is out there, if they're keying in on him, right, if he, gets denied, the entry pass on a post up, or if they just can't find him on a possession, then you've got to try to put some, scrounge together something out of that. And I don't think it necessarily feels like OKC has the creators up and down their roster to be able to deal with that, right? If SGA really doesn't have it going. And I mean, in this one, 24 points, but on poor efficiency, there's just 9 of 20 shooting from the floor. Didn't hit his first 3 until, pretty late into the game. Only got to the free throw line 6 times. This is a very uncharacteristic SGA performance kind of across the board, and including 6 turnovers. That's the other part is across the board, the Thunder really didn't take care of the ball, but a lot of that came from their 2 primary ball handlers, right? SGA 6 turnovers, J-Dub 4 turnovers. And like you said, that's got to be credit to the Pacers defense. And I do wonder, like, what's the adjustment, right? What's the fix if you're Mark Daigneault? Is it simply just play a little bit cleaner? It feels like it wasn't necessarily like self-inflicted turnovers. Like these were like, this was pressure by the Indiana defense.
Yeah, I think you want to try to be a little bit more organized, try to create some mismatches there where either SGA or J-Dub can take advantage of seams in the Pacers defense. But you have to give credit to Indiana again, because I think they figured that out. They seemed like they had the pick and roll pretty well snuffed out. With Turner playing such a high level of defense, they just really didn't have that secondary option. A guy like Chet, who was just 1 of 5 in the fourth quarter, even J-Dub 2 of 5 in the fourth quarter. I think that's where Indiana's defense just really were able to kind of establish their identity and become dominant during the last crucial 12 minutes of the game. And that was it. That was the deciding factor. So as far as Daigneault is concerned, what adjustments he could potentially make, try to create some different opportunities, maybe swing the ball a little bit more cleanly, try to find different mismatches that they could take advantage of, maybe get Holmgren off of Turner, maybe have him dominate, get a little pick and roll action where he can kind of take a small, like a guy like Haliburton, perhaps maybe do some things a little differently that they might be able to create some better looks at the basket, because that's really where Oklahoma City could dominate this series pretty completely if they were able to create those mismatches, but they just weren't able to do so, especially in the last 12 minutes of the game.
Yeah, and you mentioned, right, Chet Holmgren, despite the really fantastic start offensively to this game, I want to say he finished the first quarter with either 13 or 14 points. I don't have it directly in front of me, but 13, finishing the night, there you go. Yeah, finishing the night with only 20, right? So 7 the rest of the way, including that 1 for 5 there in the fourth. Only just 0 of 6 from downtown, didn't hit a single 3. If you're OKC, do you feel the need to overreact to this game, right? Like they were very like kind of, laissez-faire, nonchalant after the game 1 loss, right? They were like, yeah, it happened. Like kind of just like, oh, okay, it's whatever. Like almost treating it like it was a regular season game. And then they bounced back in a big way in game 2, looked like the dominant OKC team that we've seen all year long. Is there anything from this game that you take away if you're OKC and you think, man, okay, maybe the Pacers kind of figured something out about us? Or do you think this is, something where you just look at like Chet's production, only 6 for 15 from the floor. And you're like, all right, well, if Chet actually hits a couple threes in this game, then we're like right there in another nail biter with the Pacers, as opposed to them kind of not coasting away with the win at the end, because it was still like a 2-possession game down the stretch. And, a couple things break a little bit differently. Shai hits 1 or 2 more shots. Chet hits 1 or 2 more shots. Like so is this a game where you feel like OKC needs to overreact to it or not really?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think it's a bad loss. It takes away some of the momentum you were able to reestablish after game 2. But again, a buzzer beater in game 1, you take that X factor that you can't possibly control and you remove that. OKC wins game 1. They win game 2 pretty easily. You can afford to lose game 3, but that's not the story of the game. So at the same time, now, as far as the series plays out, this is where Carlisle has a huge advantage over Daigneault. He's pretty consistent. He's established his identity. He knows what he wants to do. How Daigneault responds, I think, is going to be a huge question for game 4. Me personally, I don't think an overreaction is necessary. Again, like you said, if you have a couple possessions swing your way, if you can create some of those mismatches that you can create a little bit easier offense, then you're right back in the game. Maybe you even find a way to win game 3. It didn't happen that way, but you can win game 4 just as easily. And then you have that kind of momentum balancing out a little bit. And an overreaction, you don't want to change your identity at this stage. Like, you've gotten here because of who you are. And you have to tip your hat to Indiana for being able to do what they could to take you away from your identity. Now it's all about reestablishing it, getting back to what it was that has been your strength for the last couple of seasons in this current iteration of the Thunder team. And doing so, an overreaction or panicking is only going to make things much worse. So you don't want to get, they're not desperate right now. They're just down 1 game, and you can easily even things up with a game 4 win, take it back to Oklahoma City and find another way to build on that momentum. But if you overreact at this stage, you're basically dooming yourself. So I'm curious to see, being unfamiliar with this situation, how he responds and tries to get the best out of his team.
I really do wonder if at any point in this series we'll see the switch back to the starting lineup that they had been running, right? Reinsert Isaiah Hartenstein over Case and Wallace, and maybe we won't see it ahead of Game 4 because, like you said, maybe it's not a bad enough loss to warrant that type of an overreaction to completely change. Even though that was the starting lineup that they were running for most of the playoffs up until this series, maybe that would be the last thing that Daigneault wants to do. But that is a lever that he could pull if he decides that he wants to go back to some of the size with the Pacers' ability to kind of hurt them on the interior in this game, getting downhill quite a bit more. That was a significant talking point after Game 2, going into Game 3 from Indiana's perspective, is just getting downhill, playing with significantly more pace, right? Getting those paint touches to kind of kickstart their offense, and then finding those seams that you mentioned earlier, and they certainly did that here in this game. It's going to be very interesting to watch this chess battle ultimately unfold. We're in for this. It's already feeling like it's going to be an all-time classic series through a handful of games, and we are certainly in store for hopefully what is a handful of more exciting games in this one. But that's going to do it for our edition here of Locked On NBA Game Night. Make sure to tune back in right here at Locked On NBA. We've got 2 episodes for you every day on the Locked On NBA feed. For your next listen, go check out Locked On Pacers with Tony East, Locked On Thunder with Rylan Stiles for recaps and boots on the ground local analysis of the NBA Finals. Remember to help us grow by listening every single day wherever you get your podcasts and subscribing on YouTube. Until then, we'll catch you guys on our very next game night.